Faster than a speeding bullet.
I ran until my muscles burned and my veins pumped battery acid.
More powerful than a locomotive.
An idea is like a virus. Resilient. Highly contagious.
Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
All right, what's up, ladies and gentlemen? Jerred Moon here, and welcome to the Better Humanology podcast. So it's just me today. I've been wanting to give everybody an update on my ketogenic experiment, more of ketogenic and performance, because as you have listened over the last several months, I've taken extreme interest into ketosis and the ketogenic diet, and more specifically, keto and performance, how it's going to help or hurt performance athletes. And so we had James Slade on, who's absolutely crushing it, with kind of muscle gain, and also he's doing some Spartan races, and he's very scientific about how he, does pre-race, during race, and post-race stuff with the ketogenic diet. And that's what originally intrigued my interest. And so I dove in. I actually tried the ketogenic diet, and today I kind of want to spill the beans. What was the latest update? I kind of went silent on it for a long time as I just started to test more and more things and do a lot more research. And I'm kind of done at this point. I had kind of come to my own conclusion, and it's not going to be a black or white, yes or no, keto is good, keto is bad answer. I'm actually going to try and help individualize it as much as I can for you. So listen to this entire episode, and it's just me and the microphone today, and I'm going to try and help you out as much as possible. Feel free to ask any questions. You can hit me up on Instagram, shoot me an email, whatever it is, whatever you'd like to do, and I can help you out. So before we hop into that, I do want to say right now is a great time to hop into Garage Gym Athlete Training because we are just wrapping up. We program in 12-week cycles, and then we operate in 4-week cycles within the 12-week cycles. And we're finishing out a deload week. We'll be hopping into the last wave before the new year. So if you guys want to hop in right now, now would be the perfect time to hop into Garage Gym Athlete. We have the shred track, for trying to shred out. Really, it's more muscle body composition with some aerobic endurance right now. Hard to Kill is focusing on all the different energy systems while gaining some strength. We have the strength track, which is really awesome for gaining strength with limited conditioning. And then we have the no gear track, which is body weight only. And we're actually going to be introducing some new tracks very soon. We did a vote inside the Garage Gym Athlete Facebook group, and we had hundreds of people vote on which track they wanted to see next. And the winner by far was what we're calling internally right now, we might change the name eventually, is the 3-block track. And the 3-block track, if you don't know, we program our workouts in blocks, which are 10-minute increments. That way, none of our athletes train over an hour. And the 3-block would be, obviously, 3 blocks. So 3 10-minute blocks worth of training every single day. 30 minutes worth of training for people, if you're ever in a tight time situation, or maybe you only have 30 minutes to train each day, but you want it to be the most effective possible, because if you only have 30 minutes, you really don't want to be wasting your time doing things that are inefficient or not optimal. And so that's going to be the next track we're launching at Garage Gym Athlete. Go to garagegymathlete.com, get in now, and we will soon start doing beta testing on 3-block, meaning taking current members and adding them to the 3-block track to get feedback and let you start utilizing that stuff. So if you guys want to get started with a free trial, go to garagegymathlete.com and go ahead and get started. All right, now let's talk about keto and performance, because as a Garage Gym Athlete myself, that was a big thing that I was trying to do. I wanted to find out, how's the ketogenic diet going to help the performance athlete? Because I'd heard that it's not, very helpful or beneficial, but I really like to test things on my own and find out why or what happens, where's the breaking point, because there's a lot of misinformation and incorrect information about ketogenic diets and performance. And so, because the word performance, that's the main reason, is the word performance is what's confusing people or getting people hung up or thrown off. What do we mean by performance? So that, I'm going to answer a lot of these questions, so let's just get into it, because not long ago, I set out to answer the question, will keto help or hurt my performance? But I do have to define performance, because it does come in many forms. So my definition of performance, I like to be able to do the workout Murph. A lot of you know that I did Murph for a year, every single Saturday for an entire year, excuse me, with a vest. And I did it in under 30 minutes, and I also want to be really strong. So that's my idea of performance. Murph, sub 30 minutes with a vest, and I still want to be pretty freaking strong. So another way to put it, I want to be able to perform at high outputs for long-ish periods. So not long in the realm of the endurance world, but I want to be training at a relatively high intensity with a high output for more than 3 or 4 minutes. Like I'm talking Murph, to go sub 30 on Murph with a vest, your output is kind of ridiculous. You cannot stop moving, and you're training at threshold almost the entire time. So that is something you have to take into account. I also want to be, like I said, strong. I'm a fairly strong individual. I want to maintain that strength, if not gain that strength. So right off the bat, before we get any further, we can throw out the conversations and studies on ketogenic diets that involve bodybuilders and gaining muscle on keto, because yes, that can be done. We can throw out the conversation about endurance athletes switching from carbs to fat, because we absolutely know that works. We had Zach Bitter on the podcast who talked about exactly how he does metabolic flexibility and all that stuff. Really cool. But again, he's even switching to a higher carbohydrate diet as he gets closer to races. And in all my research, I even found one study that was done on CrossFit athletes, which obviously I'm not a pure CrossFit athlete, but if you had to break down, my training and performance, it would probably be closer to what the actual work output would be closer to a CrossFit athlete, not necessarily a CrossFit, regular attendee hitting the 1 WOD per day type CrossFitter, but more of a CrossFit athlete type would probably be closer to what our training looks like. But I did find one study specifically on CrossFit athletes who were doing ketogenic diet. And initially, if you read through it, it says, that it was awesome for these CrossFit athletes. Going on this ketogenic diet was absolutely helpful, and that it worked for them, and, it helped them crush and perform better and all these things. And I was like, okay, I wonder how that happened. But then if you actually look into the study, they actually had like a stipulation, no elite athletes allowed in the study. No high-level athletes. You had to be basically middle of the road, or kind of, much higher body fat, like somewhere north of 30%, closer to 40% body fat. So definitely not me at all. So no one had really answered the questions, what was going to happen for me. And so I've kind of defined my performance and what I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about keto and bodybuilding or hypertrophy, gaining muscle. I'm not talking about keto and endurance. And I'm not talking about keto and CrossFit for people who are not in very good shape. So second, you have to know, I'm also answering this question for me, because it may sound selfish, but nutrition is so highly individualized. I can't claim to have all the answers, and to be honest, that'd be crazy. So just some of my study and research might help you make decisions, and like I said, I'm going to try to give you information that'll help you, but ultimately you need to decide for yourself, try things out for yourself. And lastly, I think you need to know my current starting point. I talked about being fairly strong, so on and so forth, but to actually know my background, my starting point as a person starting on the ketogenic diet. So I come from a more paleo background. I consume a lot of healthy fats, and I have for several years. So my carbs are primarily sweet potatoes and other vegetables. I do fast frequently. I train a lot, and I'm very fit with a great metabolism. And my body fat is typically around 8 to 10%, sometimes up to 12% if I'm not paying attention, and can get down 8 or below if I'm trying to. So I'm also very fast. I can run a mile, typically pretty mile, sub 6 minutes into the 5s, and I'm, like I said, very strong, pretty strong for compared to most people who train an hour a day. And I'm, why do I have to say all that? Really, it's to help you contrast where you're at versus where I'm at. Some of you are probably fitter, faster, stronger than I am. Some of you are probably are not. So keto and you may be very different than keto and me. And I just like to make sure that you know exactly kind of where my starting point is to help you make best decisions if you're thinking about doing this keto thing, if you're curious how close we are, and maybe you would have similar results. So when I started this experiment, there's a lot of keto experts who would try to educate me about fat adaptation, gluconeogenesis, and other party lines that are thrown around. terms and ideas they may have heard on a podcast, but never actually done the research or they've even experienced. And the people I'm talking about here are I had a lot of people email me and chime in about certain things that they thought that I didn't understand, because just like with any diet people get kind of wrapped around, they get in these camps, right? And they get very dogmatic about their nutrition approach and why it's correct. That's why I liked working with James Slade, who we had on the podcast, because he was really, helping individualize. Very smart dude. He's done his research. And so I'm talking primarily about people who, had just kind of got dogmatic, saw me posting stuff on Instagram or talking about it on the podcast and shot me some emails. And so I'm trying to avoid those kind of conversations here when doing this podcast. And if you're thinking about contacting me because you think I missed something, I probably didn't. I'm not trying to sound arrogant, but I probably didn't miss something. This is what I do for a living. I sit around and research this kind of stuff. So, that is where I'm coming from. Did a ton of research, worked with a lot of experts, had a lot of awesome people on the podcast. Then I decided to go keto, not some random shot at ketosis. So another thing that people would assume, and the reason I had to kind of talk about where my diet was, where my performance is, because a lot of people would also assume I was coming from some sort of shitty standard American diet and that keto was going to take this huge adjustment period. But to be honest, going keto for me was as simple as taking sweet potatoes out of my lunch meal prep and just having just meat and vegetable, and then adding a few other things just to make sure I'm getting more fat. But this was not like a huge thing for me. This was, and just because if you are paleo or about paleo, there's not that much of a difference. You just have to be a little bit more strict on your carbohydrates and how you consume them and in what forms. But to be honest, there's not a huge difference. Now, if you do want to know more about keto or how it works, there are a lot of great resources. I'm not explaining a lot of the, net carbohydrates versus insulin and blood sugar and all that stuff. I'm not talking about the science of keto. There are 1.5 million keto specific podcasts now you could go do if you want to get into that. But I'm just going to be talking about keto and performance. So I want to talk about the adaptation period and how fitness works now. So if you want to go keto, your body will have to adapt. So at the onset of this experiment, I knew my performance would take a hit, and most experts concluded it could take anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months to become fully keto adapted. So given my background, diet, fitness level, all that, most agreed it'd be on the shorter end of that spectrum. So when I heard 6 weeks of decreased performance, though, when I initially started talking to people about keto, I was already a little bit like, what the hell? Because, then we start getting to some of the keto gurus who I talked to and start telling me, oh, well, it could be 6 months. And so I felt I had to step in and say something. Basically, as a strength and conditioning coach, people telling you that there's a 6-month adaptation period in which your performance will suck and suffer. So let's just talk about that. As someone who's more performance-based, I don't care if I can walk. I don't care if I can, lift a barbell, but the weight doesn't matter. No, I want to be strong. I want to be fast. I want to be able to do Murph very quickly. So I wanted to make sure that these nutrition experts understand how fitness and performance work. So trying to flip okay, you're a keto expert telling me the adaptation period. Let me, from a strength and conditioning coach, tell you how fitness and performance works. Because remember, I'm talking about keto and performance. So if you could care less about your mile time, Murph, or a back squat, then there are much better things that you could be doing with your time right now, other than listening to this podcast specifically. And if you don't give a shit about those things, then if you don't give a shit about those things, then keto is probably, perfect for you. If you just care about, walking and staying healthy, but you have some weight to lose, keto may be perfect, to be honest. I think there's so many great benefits to the ketogenic diet. Now going back to this performance adaptation period and how fitness works. So to state the obvious fact, if you train at lower intensities for 6 months, this is the long end of the spectrum in which your performance could take a hit. If you train at lower intensities for 6 months, you will become less fit. One more time. If you train at lower intensities for 6 months, you will become less fit. There's no way around that. So I'm not sure how anyone can miss this. Maybe the counter argument is that in the longer timeline of your life, it all works out. But what if you don't want to be keto for the rest of your life and you just want to check it out? You just want to try something, see if keto is for you, isn't for you. Well, you can train at lower intensities for 6 months. You're going to become less fit. You will become weaker. You will get slower, and you will not perform the same. So what I'm trying to point out here is that there's no like, okay, I'm keto adapted, I'm now keto. There's no keto magic. And then your body starts using ketones and you get stronger and faster at the 6-month mark. That's not how biology works. That's not how the body works. So it doesn't matter which fuel you're burning, fat or carbs, ketones are not steroids or any other performance-enhancing drug. So you will have lost your fitness, and it will now take 3 to 6 months to get back to where you started. Then you can start making progress from where you left off. Then over the next 12 weeks, you can improve. So worst case scenario, 15 months till you start setting any new PRs. Okay, let me explain that a little bit. And that's worst case scenario. Best case scenario, 3 to 6 months till you set any new PRs. So I just want to explain that a little bit more. If you train at a lower intensity, less weight on the bar, less fast, lower intensities, and it does take a full 3 to 6 months for your adaptation period to happen, you're going to lose all. It's not like you're going to maintain where you were at. You're going to lose any fitness that you had. Your performance will decrease. And now to get your performance back to where it was, you're going to have to train really hard to get it back to where it was, what you've lost over 3 to 6 months. Any athletes who've taken time off from being more serious will know what I'm talking about. Then after you make it back to where you were, then you can start to increase from where you were, using the new ketogenic diet. So I think the real timeline here when we're talking about performance, because people are saying, well, there's a 6-week to 6-month time period, but if you're training at lower intensities and you're a performance athlete, you're going to get less fit. So this is something that you have to take in. I think that people need to take into account before going keto to really make sure they understand that it's not just going to be like this 6-week decrease and then all of a sudden you're back to where you were or better. If just how fitness works, how the aerobic system works, how strength training works. If you're training at lower intensities for a long period of time, you are going to become less fit. You're going to have to work to get it back, and then you're going to have to work to improve. So now, if you're someone who truly cares about performance, how are you feeling about keto at this point? And this is where I started to struggle with the whole idea because my performance was suffering massively. And I was like, well, how long do I have to hold on to this? Like, why do I have to do this? So let's talk about kind of my experiment, what happened. So I went keto. I went into ketosis relatively fast because I actually did a lot of the stuff intentionally. Like I said, I was working with someone to help me make sure my diet was dialed in, my macros were dialed in. But I did a lot of fasting the week before I did keto. I was doing 18, 20, I did 23-hour fast. I was doing fast, basically trying to reduce the glycogen stores in my body so my body would kick into ketosis faster once I did go fully keto and I wasn't really eating any carbs and going full ketogenic. And so I went into ketosis really fast. I think it was I don't really know how fast because I got the strips that you can pee on that tell you if you're pissing ketones, which is not the best indicator of whether or not, that if you're peeing too high of ketones, it means your body's not using them, but to the best of their ability, but it doesn't mean you're not in ketosis. So it only took me a couple days till I was peeing ketones, in which I originally wasn't. So from peeing on the stick to the stick saying, no, you're not in ketosis, to peeing on the stick to saying, yes, here are the ketones, happened very fast. I'm talking about a couple days. I think it was just over the weekend and a Monday, so 4 days, something like that. And then I started training. And what I would notice, just from a kind of a objective standpoint is if I were to do light runs, I was okay. I did some bike rides and I was okay. And then I would also be okay with strength training, but not great. I felt kind of dull when I was doing the strength training. And so that was my initial, let's say, 2 weeks of how I was feeling about being ketogenic diet, as I was just kind of okay, like good on some things, okay on the strength training, didn't feel like after it. But then if you followed the Instagram, I posted a couple times about Murph. I started testing Murph weekly to see where my Murph performance would go. And so what happened was the first Murph I did, going from typically being able to hit Murph with a vest on sub 30 minutes. I got up to, I think it was like 52 minutes, 52 and some change. And I just hit an absolute wall in that workout that I truly have never really experienced. And it was definitely I was out of glycogen. You know, I was out of that. I was training at such a high intensity. My body wanted to burn carbohydrates. It did not want to burn fat, would not use fat. And you just kind of hit this wall. And it's basically like a governor in a car. You know, governor won't let you go past a certain speed. Is basically what your body's doing. Your body is forcing you to slow down because it just doesn't have the fuel for it. It doesn't have the fuel to support what you're trying to do. And so that's what happened. And so I had some piss poor performance. Wasn't very happy about that, but I kept on going, and everything else remained kind of constant. It was okay, strength training, okay, but not great, and light runs and bike rides, those kind of things were fine. But I was also kind of getting annoyed because I was having to change my training up a little bit because I follow daily no deviation typically, the Garage Gym Athlete programming. I follow the Hard to Kill track. That's what I'm doing every single day in my training. And so I don't like to have to adapt, but I was trying to make this keto thing work. So I was adapting some of my training, doing longer bike rides, things like that to make this adaptation. But that's kind of where my performance ended up. And then more and more research and talking to other people doing keto and more performance-based, the recommendation then started to come in about substituting carbohydrates. So I looked at resistant starches, also a supplement called 3Carb, same company as 3Fuel. And resistant starches it's a carbohydrate, it's like a pure carbohydrate, but it doesn't affect your blood sugar as much. It acts like a fiber, basically. So you can use this carbohydrate and still perform without, and being able to stay in keto is the best way to put it. But then this is where I kind of was getting a disconnect. It's like, okay, well, I can be keto, but I'm having to time my carbohydrates before and after to get to the performance level that I'm accustomed to. But I was still in ketosis, so still testing and everything was still good to go. But that's where I started to get why? Okay, do I need carbohydrates? Is this something my body is going to require? And it led to me doing a lot more research. But first, let's talk about carbon, glycogen, and fat oxidation. So when I first started to report some awful performance metrics while on keto, I started to get a lot of messages and comments, like I said, and emails from the diehard keto people, and they'd say things like, you're not fat adapted, or your body is not using the fat for fuel. Your body is pulling the carbohydrate lever right now, not the fat lever. And this is where I could tell people they had been listening to their keto podcast, but they have yet to dive into human physiology. So I did spend the first 2 years of college. I did not finish this major. I ended up finishing a different major, but as a food nutrition science major. So a lot of the chemistry behind this stuff I'm already very well aware of and how it works. But one thing I wanted to point out, and I feel like if people doing keto didn't know this, then people listening to this podcast right now might not know it. So I just want to make sure that we all understand that we all burn fat. You burn fat. I burn fat. Fat oxidation happens in all humans. So that is just something that I think everyone should know right now. So a well-trained human who is not keto can burn fat in the amounts as high as 60 grams of fat per hour. So well-trained, not keto, that's quite a bit of fat per hour. But becoming keto adapted just means you're better at burning fat. Your body can burn fat better than someone who's not keto adapted and use it for energy. So a well-trained human who is keto can burn fat in the amounts as high as 100 to 110 grams of fat per hour. So 60 versus 110. We're all burning fat. We all burn fat. So I'm giving you the trained human beings because we're talking about performance, but even untrained, they burn less, but still you're burning fat. And that's where, I just briefly want to talk about carbon. Fat and carbohydrates are just, they're carbon chains in your body. And your body goes to look for energy. It breaks down the carbon chain, uses it for energy, and then you exhale carbon. And that is how when you burn fat, you're breathing it out. You actually breathe fat out. That's where the fat goes, quote unquote. Now, it's very easy for your body to break down carbohydrates and use them for fuel. And so it prefers to do that, but it will also do it with fat. And the more fat you have and less carbohydrates, your body gets more efficient at, quote unquote, being fat adapted or keto adapted and breaking down those larger carbon chains and using those as energy. And why am I pointing this out? Because, I think we get into these mindsets. We all do. I've seen it a lot, especially in our coaching courses and people programming. Human beings are not robots, not even the slightest, tiniest bit. And so I jokingly say that people think that there are these levers that we pull in our body to turn things off and on. Like we had a conversation in the Garage Gym Athlete group about being catabolic versus anabolic, and that whole ridiculous myth, in the bodybuilding world about being anabolic versus catabolic, in these constant states. Like I'm just going to pull the anabolic lever, and or pull the catabolic lever to lose weight, and all these things. It's just kind of silly because your body's not like that. These are just chemical processes that happen as a part of our metabolism. Same with burning fat. So your body does not have a carbohydrate lever, and then all of a sudden it turns to a fat lever. You can only become more efficient at something your body's already doing. So your body's burning fat, you can become more efficient at it by feeding it less carbohydrates and more fat. So that is just a big point I want to get across to everyone. We all burn fat, and you just burn it at different levels if you are a well-trained human being versus, keto, non-keto. Okay, so you don't have a fat lever, you don't have a carb lever, your body's using them all the time, depending on the intensity of your training, the type of training, and a lot of things that really just have to go along with intensity in fuel sources. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about now is, I really started researching a ton after my MERP performance was super terrible. And this is where my keto experiment turns into the failed keto experiment. Because I was keto a couple weeks, a month or whatever, and I had to call it quits after about the 4-week time period because my performance was going downhill so fast, and I just was like, I can't do this anymore because I'm going to walk out at the end of this experiment weaker and slower for no real reason. I wasn't getting a ton of other benefits from having pretty much have been on a healthier paleo-ish diet to switching to keto. Wasn't a huge difference for me. So I will say one thing that I'll talk about some of the benefits to ketosis, why you might want to consider it later, but the one thing that was helping me a lot was I did feel like I was getting some cognitive benefits, but other than that, my performance was pretty much in the trash, and so why was that happening? Well, I started to do some more research on at what given intensities did your body, want to use different fuels. So what I ended up doing is looking at different studies that had to correlate with VO2 max and fuel source. So anywhere from 0 to 49, 50 to 59, 60 to 69% of your VO2 max, you're typically optimal for keto or fat. And this translates to different heart rate zones. And here, I'll pull it up. I didn't have this one pulled up. Let me open this. Yeah, so what we have now. All right, so a lot of these studies that have been done, they do everything based off of your VO2 max. So it's really impossible for us, me, you, or anyone not doing a legit scientific study to tell you what our VO2 max is right now or any given training session without wearing all the gear and the stuff that you need to. But what there is a correlation between VO2 max and heart rate. So 5 to 19% of your VO2 max correlates to 0 to 49% of your heart rate. Now, these are some studies that link these two. It is correlative data, is not the most scientific, but for what we're doing, pretty damn close. So 20 to 34% of your VO2 max is linked to 50 to 59% of your heart rate. 35 to 50% of your VO2 max is linked to 60 to 69% max heart rate. 51 to 66% of your VO2 max is linked to 70 to 79% max heart rate. 67 to 81% of your VO2 max is linked to 80 to 89% max heart rate. And then 82 to 98% of your VO2 max, extreme intensity, is linked to 90 to 100% of your max heart rate. So why did I just spout all that off? Because I just want you to understand that the different training zones that you could be in and why this matters. And so typically in those lower realms of the VO2 max, which is, let's say 20 to 50%, which is anywhere from 50 to 70% of your max heart rate, you're closer to your body wanting to use fat for fuel, especially the much lower intensities. And then you get into that 70 to 79% max heart rate, which is around 51 to 66%. And it's kind of, it really depends on the person whether or not you're burning more fat, more carbs, but you're definitely going to be transitioning from fat to more carbohydrates. And then 80 to 89% of your max heart rate, or 67 to 81% of your VO2 max, and above really is purely carbohydrate. Your body doesn't want to use anything else, and really it won't. All the studies that we have, even if you got the Art and Science of Ketogenic Performance book, like there's no real, not even in the keto world, there's no real debate that once you get into these extremely high intensity VO2 max situations, really high heart rates, your body will not utilize fat anymore. So that's what was happening to me on Murph. It only wants carbohydrate. If you don't have any glycogen stores, you have no carbs in your body, you're going to hit a wall, and it's going to be pretty bad. I'm going to take water for a second. And so that is kind of where I got to in my research. So what I ended up doing was taking, and this is my best recommendation for should you be keto or not, or would it help your performance? So I took over a month's worth of training data, and I looked at it, and I found out, I correlated all of my different heart rate training zones to the different energy fuels that they burned, and found out that for me specifically, I spent almost 70% of my training time in these zones, the intensity zones, that the body, proven through research, scientific research, not my opinion, through scientific research, that I train in a zone where glycogen is the preferred energy source, not fat. 70% of my training time. This is not Murph. This is just, I looked at just past training data because I'm always wearing a heart rate monitor. I have this information. I pulled it up, looked, okay, I train it at a relatively high intensity, and so my body prefers glycogen and carbohydrates nearly 70% of the time, 65 to 70% of the time. Depends on if you're looking at rest periods and all this other stuff, which gets a little convoluted there, but really 65 to 70% of my time, I am optimizing for carbohydrate use in my training. So that only leaves about 30 to 35% of the time that I would be good for keto. So immediately, this is where kind of week 4, looking at things, I immediately was like, I should probably stop because this isn't going to get better. There is not an adaptation period that I'm going to push through and find out, okay, keto is now going to work for me because of my training intensities. So this is me specifically. Like I said, I set out to answer the question for myself, and I pretty much did. It did not work for me because of my training intensity. I train at very high intensities. That's just the way I train. I balance this with deload weeks and rest days and a lot of recovery. You don't have to train at these intensities. And so let me now pivot to, I had another athlete who was very interested in keto, and he also tracks heart rate data. And I kind of gave him these stipulations. I was like, look, dude, if you spend a majority of your time at these heart rate zones or this one, so on and so forth, you're going to be more primed for keto or more primed for carbohydrates. So just take a look at your training data. And then he looked at his training data, and he looked at some of the spreadsheets that I was using, and he's like, you know what, I only spend about, and we're doing the same training. He's like, I only spend about 10% of my time in the optimal for carbs and closer to 90% in the optimal for keto. Because the optimal for keto is not some like slow walking style performance. It's still a high level of performance. Like, it's still pretty high effort to be at this given VO2 max. Like, if you want to be around 60 to or 35, 50, 51, 66% of your VO2 max, that is still pretty high intensity for most people. And so in his case specifically, we're doing the same training, but we're training at different intensities. We're different ages, different intensities, all these other things. So I looked at his data and was like, well, you might be perfect for keto. You want to drop a little bit of weight. Your intensities are almost completely optimized for where keto would work for you. So yeah, you should do keto. I think it would work really great for you. So he just recently started going keto. Hopefully I can give you an update and see how he's going and see if his performance, in theory, based off of everything I've said, he should do really well. We'll see if that's true. I'm not 100% sure, but that is the theory to this point. Me, you could just look at the data, and I could have, if I had done all this research ahead of time and, maybe I could have not done the keto experiment altogether. But like I said, I prefer to try things out, test them out, see where the wall was. And I found out the wall is at very specific instances in my training, and I kind of found out why. So that's kind of the end result of this keto experiment for me. And so I can't tell you keto is not going to work for you or keto is going to work for you. I can only say, how hard do you actually train? How intense are you actually in your training sessions? I train at really high intensities. That's it. And so, ketogenic diet is not great for me. And that's like you going to, why does this work for endurance athletes? Endurance athletes can hold a pretty high level or high percentage of their VO2 max for very long periods, but they're still right on that cusp of where they're at with their VO2 max and where they're training, being really high intensity, but still being right at the cusp of that fat zone, like where keto is still perfect. If they were to try and go faster or do a sprint or something like that, would switch and they wouldn't be as primed for that. And so that is kind of why endurance, like it's perfect for endurance. They don't go into the intensity levels or nor do they need to, and they don't for a couple of reasons. One, their aerobic system is so robust and so built up that their body doesn't need to push into those level of intensities to get a high level of performance. So maybe if I trained more aerobically more often, I could train at lower intensities with the same given output. That's a possibility. But I kind of like where my fitness level is at and what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. So I have gone back to carbohydrate use at this point, and everything snapped back, pretty fast. So what else do I have to say? Well, I think it's kind of like, using, are you better suited for fat or carbs? It's kind of like asking, is your car a diesel or gasoline engine? And that's kind of what you have to find out. Where does your intensity lie? You could go back and the reason I spouted off all those numbers, because I know it could be hard to listen to, is if you want to go back and write them all down, and then you actually have heart rate data, training data to look at, you could be like, what, I'm optimized for this, not optimized for that, so on and so forth. Now, I do want to say the benefits of going on a ketogenic diet, because what I have discovered through my experiment, through my experience now, is keto is not good for me. I could have done it for 6 weeks. I could have done it for 6 months. I could have done it for a year and truly answered that question. But I'm not trying to debunk a style of eating. I'm just actually curious if it was going to help my performance. It didn't look like that was going to be the case, so I stopped doing it. I'm not trying to give an answer to whether or not it'll help. And my actual answer is it might help you. It wasn't going to help me. So it really depends on your intensity. Now, there are a lot of benefits. Like if you are a higher body fat percentage, you need to drop weight. That's going to help you very fast to do that. If you're not as concerned about your performance, it's probably a great diet for you. Like there's the cognitive benefits were great. Similar to what I get when I'm just doing longer fast, but just a little bit better. And it was sustained throughout the day. So there are a lot of benefits to going ketogenic. And if you listen to... James Slade, like I said, we had him on the podcast. If you talk to him about how he preps for races, he does a lot of obstacle course racing and stuff. He's got it pretty dialed in with what he needs to do post and during and pre-workout and all these other things. And I think that's great. It's still possible to have a level of performance, but I just think if you're constantly training at high intensities, which hypertrophy training, bodybuilding, endurance, believe it or not, they are not super high intensity training, and that's why they work so well with keto. And if you are going high intensity, it might not work. So barring the high intensity, if you're not doing that stuff, I think keto is worth a shot for almost anyone. Give it a 4-week, 6-week try, especially if you want to shred out, because I lost a ton of weight. I didn't want to. I think I ended up losing somewhere between 10 and 15 pounds. A lot of that was water. But I did get very lean very, very quickly. You could see just there was not an ounce of squishiness on me because all the water had drained out of my body basically, and I was very lean and looked pretty good, but my performance just wasn't where I wanted it to be. And it's not like I had to gain body fat to get my performance back. I had to eat carbohydrates. What is a carbohydrate? Through the name, you can just carbohydrate. It's carbon plus water. That's actual the molecular breakdown of carbohydrate. And so, yeah, I started eating more carbohydrates, clean carbs, and that helps your body retains that water, so you have more water just in your body, and so you're a little less cut, if you will, when you're eating a ton of carbohydrates compared to keto. So if any of that other stuff, you want to gain muscle, you want to do more endurance stuff, or you want to get shredded really fast, keto may be perfect. Give it a try. To be honest, it's been, in that regard, it's probably more beneficial than anything else. I've tried over the last several decades of training here, having been in a lot of different camps and worlds in the fitness industry. But right now, I am performance and probably will be for the rest of my life. But maybe as my intensity dies down, keto might be something I revisit if my intensity dies down. So yeah, that's pretty much where we're at. I don't think I have anything else, guys. If you have any questions about keto and performance, or how you could translate this to your life, or things that you should be looking at, please let me know. The best place to reach me right now is going to be on Instagram. I'm at EO3_fit. You can message me there. I can answer any of your questions in regards to this stuff. I do have a couple of spreadsheets for some of the stuff. If you're looking at, wanting to break down your training or look at the different heart rate zones, VO2 max, I'd happily give you guys access to any of that. Just shoot me a message on Instagram, and I will do that. But that is the results of my keto experiment right now. If I get any more information, more research, anything else pops up, I will let you know. But that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for listening. I am out.
Your best. Losers always whine about their best.